out from this. One was the sensation that you're a fraud. So it's really this feeling like you're a fake, like you're tricking other people into thinking that you're good at something or knowledgeable about something or competent, and eventually they're going to find you out and call you out on it, and you lose everything you've achieved, and it's a very stressful feeling to have. The second thing to point out is it's despite any of your successes or achievements that you've made. So a lot of times, actually, people who achieve more feel this feeling more because it's like that they have more to prove. There's a quote actually by the philosopher Bertrand Russell that I thought summed this up pretty well. It's a pretty famous quote, but he said, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts." So there's actually a name for that quote. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. A lot of research has been done on it, and it's been discovered that people who are less competent actually tend to overestimate their abilities more. So the more competent you are, the more you tend to doubt your abilities, which is really interesting. So that's kind of where imposter syndrome might come from. It's this feeling like you have more and more to prove can increase that stress on you, that maybe you don't deserve it, or that you can't prove it. So we can kind of break imposter syndrome down into three types or three main characteristics. The first one, I call this the I'm a fake type. So this is the type where, again, talking about this feeling of fraud, like you're tricking people into believing something and they're going to figure it out. So some examples that might show this well would be feeling like your acceptance into some kind of program, maybe into a coding boot camp, for example, or a university, feeling like that was a mistake, or feeling like a job offer that you got was a mistake, and that you somehow tricked them into giving it to you, and you're bound to just mess it up pretty soon. And then it'll be taken away from you. Or being afraid to call yourself a developer is another one. That was one that I personally experienced when I was in my coding boot camp. I still remember the first time I called myself a developer, and after I said it, kind of paused for a second. I was like, are they going to say something? Are they going to call me out? But they didn't, because obviously they believed me. But so this is the I'm a fake type. Second type is called the I'm not smart, I'm just lucky type. So this is a type where you attribute all of your successes to some kind of external factor, like luck or a fluke or being in the right place at the right time. Basically anything other than your own hard work and your own abilities. So something that this might look like is saying that for other people it's quote unquote easy, and for you, you have to work a lot harder to achieve the same things that they do. Another thing it might be is feeling like a promotion you got at work, for example, was a mistake, that you were just in the right place at the right time, and that's why you got it. But of course, that's not how promotions work, right? There's a lot more basis to them than that. So attributing success to external factors. The last type, call it the thanks, but it was no big deal type. This is the type where you are discounting your successes. So minimizing accomplishments, saying that they're unimportant, difficulty accepting praise, that sort of thing. So it's like, oh, it's no big deal what I did. It's not important. It's not worth anything. Like this feeling that you have nothing of value to contribute, and the things that you do are pointless, or that anyone could have done them. Something like that. One last note about this is something that it's not. It can often be confused with modesty or humility. So especially the last type I just talked about, if someone is saying, oh, it's no big deal, anyone could have done it, that sort of thing, that can often be mistaken for being humble about their abilities, but really there might be a lot more going on under the surface there. It's also not just plain self-doubt. So self-doubt is a huge component of it, right? But self-doubt is more just the lack of confidence in your own abilities to achieve something. And having these feelings of being an imposter is kind of a layer on top of that, of feeling like even though you're not sure of yourself that you can achieve these things, you're still somehow fooling everyone else into believing that you can achieve them. So usually in cases, again, where you more high-achieving people tend to feel this. Okay, so that's what it is. Who does it affect? I think by a show of hands earlier, we kind of realized that it can affect everyone. And that's why it's kind of a trick question. So everyone sometimes feels like an imposter or like a fake. Um, it's even really common among celebrities, famous people who've achieved a lot and we would never expect. A couple examples of people who've been really outspoken about it: Sheryl Sandberg, Emma Watson. Another one, a little closer to the tech industry, would be Mike Cannon-Brookes. So he's the co-founder of Atlassian, which a lot of us use his products every day, something like Jira or Confluence or Bitbucket, things like that. He actually calls himself the accidental billionaire. So I don't know how you become an accidental billionaire, and I wish that I did, but he somehow doesn't feel that he deserves those things that he's achieved, even though, thousands, however many developers use the products from his company every day. And some studies have found that almost 60% of tech employees experience imposter syndrome. And whether or not you feel this it depends on a lot of different factors, obviously, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly one reason where it comes from or why it happens. But we can kind of break it down a little bit by groups to understand maybe some of these causes. One of them, talking about women and imposter syndrome, this term was actually coined during a study from the 70s on a group of high-achieving women that was aiming to understand why they felt that they didn't deserve their achievements. So that's where the term actually came from. But after the study, the researchers acknowledged, we were just studying women, but we think that this probably affects other people as well. And since the 70s, there have been a lot of studies on it. And there's actually some that have found that men may be impacted harder by imposter syndrome because there are stronger societal pressures on them to be high achieving. But thinking about in the tech industry, there's a smaller percentage of women and minorities. It's, as we all know, the tech industry is a pretty male-dominated industry. So the smaller percentage of these minority groups suggests that they may feel that they have more to prove, that the gap is kind of bigger and they have to work harder to fill that gap. But on the other hand, there's other studies that suggest men don't let their doubts stop them as often as women do. So while they may be feeling these doubts and fears harder or more often, they're less likely to let that hold them back from pursuing opportunities. One suggestion that researchers came up with out of that study was that because of the lower societal pressure on women to be high achieving, it may make them feel freer to make efforts to improve because the fear of failure, there's less repercussions from failure in that case. That's the idea. So we talked about women, minorities, other groups like that in tech, but one other interesting one to talk about is coming from a non-traditional educational background. So a lot of people here obviously attended a coding boot camp. That's how you got into tech. This is from the Stack Overflow survey, their annual survey. A lot of you probably have heard of it, maybe even taken the survey. It is a little bit biased, of course. The people that take this are maybe not representational of the group of the industry as a whole. But I still think there's some really interesting figures from it. So if you look at the top 5 or 6 undergraduate majors here, they're almost all related to computers in some way, besides natural sciences. But again, all computers are science related. So it's not until you get down to like the business discipline down here, or humanities like I did. There are very few people in the industry that came from these backgrounds. But again, at a code camp, that can be kind of a different distribution. So at least from the code camp that I attended, this graph was probably flipped upside down, right? Because code camps are now a way to bring more people into the industry that previously didn't have access to it or wouldn't have even considered joining it. But that can also bring with it a lot of these feelings of maybe not fitting in or not feeling like you have the right background to participate in what you're doing. And I know from my own experience that when I was at my code camp, I felt really comfortable there because everyone, it felt like, was like me. They were all humanities majors. There was even another person who had taught English abroad like I did in a group of only 20 people. So I felt really comfortable and like I belonged there. But when you get out into the industry as a whole, it looks a lot more like this. So kind of curious from the audience, who had an undergraduate degree in anything related to computers? 3, 4. 5 people? Okay. And any like humanities majors out there? Yeah, nice. Okay. And everyone else, so not related to computers. So that puts most of us down here in that. So that's really interesting. One effect that this can have is that you don't have the same context as other people. So understanding the industry and having a background in it, it can be helpful for understanding what's normal for a developer to be able to achieve, or understanding how much you are supposed to know. Coming from a background where you haven't been using computers your entire life, it can be difficult to know, like, well, I don't know how to do this. Is that normal, or is it because I'm just clueless and I have no idea what's going on? And another thing that can impact that, this one I also thought was really interesting. So this is another thing from Stack Overflow survey about how old you were when you wrote your first line of code. So overwhelmingly, everyone was 19 years or younger when they wrote their first line of code. So I was 24, so that puts me right there. And I definitely felt the impacts from this. So I've met plenty of people who tell me, I've been programming since I was 10 years old, or I wrote my first program on like a TI-89 calculator, and I thought, like, that's not what I was doing in math class. But apparently a lot of people were. And it kind of makes you feel out of place a little bit. Like, if they've been doing this so much longer than me, then what do I know? Like, why am I here? How do I have anything valuable to contribute? Can add a lot of stress and fear. Again, I'm curious from our audience here, who was 19 years or younger when they wrote their first line of code? Okay, most people. All right, older than, like 20 or older? Sweet. All right, so it's like half and half. It's a good split. So, yeah, lack of having a role model, again, is one of those things that can happen when you start at a later age. So if you have someone to look up to who is this example of what it means to be successful, or in your mind like a good software engineer, or any other role in the tech industry, really, then that can help you feel more confident on your journey to becoming that, and give you a better sense of belonging, like you have something valuable to contribute. All right, so why does this matter? Why is imposter syndrome important? Besides the obvious fact that it makes you feel terrible about yourself, and that sucks, and no one wants to feel bad about themselves, there are also a lot of studies that have shown it has really serious implications on your career success and trajectory, as well as the health of teams and the success of organizations as a whole. So there was a 2003 Cornell study that focused on the impact of women's preconceived notions about their ability on their confidence. So again, this one just focused on women, but as we already know, this can impact anyone. But in this study, they gave a group of college students a quiz on their scientific reasoning abilities. But before they took the quiz, they were asked to rate themselves on a scale of how good they were at science. So pretty arbitrary, but how good do you feel you are at science? So women rated themselves significantly lower on their scientific abilities, but they scored almost exactly the same on the quiz. So then, to show the impacts that this had, the researchers then, before telling the students their scores, they invited everyone to a science competition, and it turned out that only 49% of women accepted the invitation, but 71% of the men did. So they found out that in this case, success and confidence are really tightly, they go together really tightly, and that the lack of confidence in their abilities actually led this group of women to be less likely to pursue opportunities that were presented to them. So this feeling of being an imposter, not actually being one, just feeling like they were, it held them back from going for something. And it's, even when someone who maybe is not as qualified as you could be equally qualified, or maybe they're even less qualified, they go for an opportunity that maybe you held yourself back from because of this lack of confidence in your ability to achieve it. So it can have some pretty serious impacts on your career from that. This is a little bit more directly related to career. 2 more studies. One of them found that people having these feelings tended to be paid less. They were less likely to be promoted. They're less committed and satisfied at work. Another one found that it had a negative impact on people seeking out new job openings and promotions. So a lot of studies mostly confirming the same thing, that this can really hurt your career success, but also your satisfaction with your career. Kind of continuing on about seeking out new opportunities, another study has found that men apply for a job on average when they meet about 60% of the job requirements listed, whereas a lot of time women will wait until they feel they meet 100% of them to apply. Because, and I felt this personally myself when I was applying for a job, kind of seemed like all the job applications looked a little bit like this. So we've probably all seen something like this before. I remember I saw one that asked for 7 years of React experience. React hasn't even been around for 7 years. So if I waited until I met 100% of the qualifications, or 100% of these qualifications, I'd be waiting forever. Right? I would never get a job because I would never feel I was qualified enough. So we can kind of extrapolate that to other groups. It's not just affecting women, right? But anyone who's lacking that confidence, and like I spoke about earlier in interviews, you need that confidence to be able to convince someone else that you know what you're doing in order to get that job. So if you're lacking in that confidence, it's going to really negatively impact your ability to get a job. So kind of a summary of some of the things we talked about. The way that it can impact you on the individual level is the stress and dissatisfaction at work from that constant fear of being found out or exposed as some kind of fake or a failure. Missed opportunities like job promotions or not asking for the salary that you deserve. You could be getting paid more. If only you would ask for it. Maybe they're just waiting for you to ask. But they're not going to just give you extra money just because. Right? Another issue that I noticed a lot from this is not getting the help you need. So when I was teaching at Full Stack Academy last year, one thing that I noticed a lot is students who were afraid to ask questions, especially in front of the group, or students who are afraid to show their code to their instructors. But of course your instructor already doesn't expect you to know everything. That's why you're there. That's why they're trying to teach you. But an overwhelming number of students actually just wouldn't show their code because they were afraid of how bad it was, or they didn't think it was clean enough, or they were afraid of how it might make them look. They didn't want to look stupid. So they're missing out on getting extra instruction and extra help because of that fear. So some ways that it can impact an organization, we talked about lack of diversity. So groups that may be more heavily impacted by this tend to be less likely to try to enter into the tech industry. That could be a reason why the tech industry is not very diverse. Hidden problems are another thing. So if your employees are always thinking like, oh, okay, I know that I put this bug in the code, but I don't want to ask for help because then I'll look stupid, and we'll just sneak it in there, maybe no one will notice, and it slips through code review, and then like a few months later it blows up, and then you have a huge problem on your hands because someone was afraid to ask for help. Another thing that you can see from this is troubles delegating. People who have trouble delegating or working on teams, because you can have this feeling of perfectionism, like you need to work extra hard to prove yourself so that everyone knows that you're not a fake, or they have to do it all by yourself so that everyone knows that you can really do it. Another one could be procrastination, because the fear of failure is really a huge demotivator to starting something, right? So if you're always afraid you're going to fail and mess up, and then that failure is then going to expose you to all your colleagues or your fellow students or whoever it is, then you're likely to keep putting that off, not wanting to start it. All right, so how can we combat imposter syndrome? What can we do about it to try and fix this problem? These are just some ideas that I came up with. There are definitely a lot more, but one of the most important things to think about as an individual is taking risks. That's a really good way to put yourself out there and start overcoming those fears. And one of the best ways to take those risks that I found, especially from my time teaching, was to ask questions, especially in a group setting, right? Like for a lot of people, raising their hand to ask a question in an audience can be really scary, kind of a nerve-wracking experience. Not only because maybe you don't like speaking in front of people, but again, that fear, like maybe people think you're dumb because you didn't understand that. But we've all heard this before. Chances are someone else in the audience has the exact same question, and they were just too afraid to ask it. So this is a really good way to put yourself out there more and kind of normalize the idea for everyone that we don't all know everything, and that's okay, and we're all here to learn. Tracking your achievements is also really helpful. This can look different for different people. Like, I really love lists personally, I make a lot of lists. So I could make lists of the things that I've achieved, things that are quantifiable, right? Like the number of projects that I've built that are deployed out there for people to see, ones that maybe I've sent to my family or friends that they can look at, interact with, maybe PRs that I've had merged, or like tickets that you've completed at work, something like that. Another one that ties in with that can be contributing to open source. So this isn't something that I've personally done yet, although I would like to, but having something out there in open source that you can point to and say, like, I had something valuable to contribute and now it's out there and people are using it, that can be a really, really good boost for your confidence. And there are a lot of websites out there that are specifically geared towards people who are just starting out in programming or starting out in open source or both, that really help you along the way, and you can start with small issues and kind of work your way up. It can be really good for you. Another one that's really helpful is mentoring others. So again, when I was teaching at Full Stack Academy, I noticed this a lot, because in order to explain something to someone, you have to first understand it really well, because it's on you to explain it clearly enough for the person to understand you. It's not on them to try to figure out what you're saying. You have to be able to really articulate your ideas clearly, which means that first that you understand it really clearly. So when you can see yourself passing on that knowledge to someone else, it makes you realize, it kind of boosts your confidence in your own knowledge, because you see, like, I'm helping someone else learn. That must mean that I know something. Also, just talking to people about it. Again, when I first felt imposter syndrome, I didn't know what it was, or, it's not necessarily like a specific disorder. It's, you won't find it in like the DSM or anything like that, but it's still a thing that a lot of people feel. And talking to other people about it and realizing that it's normal helps it be less scary. So as far as on the organizational level, there are also a lot of things that can be done. A lot of this can be helped through training as well. One of the most important things is having good leaders. So people who understand that you shouldn't argue with the inner critic. That's the idea. Like, if you have these feelings of being a fraud and someone tells you, like, don't worry about it, I know you've got this, like, you're super smart, you'll figure it out, that can actually further entrench those feelings that you don't know what you're doing, and you think, like, wow, I'm really fooling them, like, they're going to figure it out and it's going to be terrible. So not arguing with that inner critic, but instead learning how to manage self-doubt and learning that it's okay, and that sometimes you kind of live with it, but not letting it stop you from doing things. Another thing that can be really helpful is having quantifiable progress check-ins, maybe in one-on-ones with a manager or something like that. This kind of goes back to tracking your achievements, so you can do that personally, but also having someone in a leadership position who's able to say, I can see this list of things that you've done, like you're having maybe less comments on your code reviews, or you're completing more tickets or more points every sprint, something like that. Then you see that, okay, I actually have something I can point to and say, like, I've achieved this. It's not just in my head, or they're not just telling me I'm doing a good job and not meaning anything by it. Another thing that can be really helpful is social activities with your coworkers. So if you feel comfortable with them, then you feel comfortable sharing your feelings about maybe your stress or your concerns about work. And then talking about those can really help reduce that a lot. And going along with that, too, is what's probably the most important thing, in my opinion, on this list, is normalizing the idea of failure in the company. So no one's perfect, right? But we all have a tendency to downplay other people's failures, but then blow up our own. So if we've normalized the idea of failure, then we know, it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to ask questions, or it's okay to make mistakes sometimes, and it reduces that fear of trying those new things that maybe you thought you weren't able to do before. So those are just, again, some of my ideas that I had on this. There are definitely a lot more out there that I haven't thought of. But that is all I have for you guys today. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear those. If anyone wants to share their experience with imposter syndrome, I'd love to hear about that, or just any comments that you have.
I think like the social awareness really helped me a lot with gain confidence, right? Like with the tech brawl last week, So going to talk to these companies,
Mhm.
these are just people to we're in the same position. But if someone else are, you don't know a whole lot about, running that business.
Yeah, realizing that we're just people too, that's like the most important thing, I think. Like, we're all on the same level. Whether or not someone's been doing this for a long time, seems like they know a lot more, like, you can get there too, basically.
I guess like one thing I difficulty with, maybe does too, but it's like being able to gauge my own abilities because it's not as clear to me at least, like where I'm at. So I guess I can say, oh yeah, I can make that do this thing that I wanted to do. But when I read something that's kind of broad or vague, like in the skills and requirements that page that you had, it says significant ability to code X, Y, Z, and I'm like, oh, is that significant?
Yeah, it's like, what does significant really mean? Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, sometimes I do something and to me it seems like no big deal, but then if I talk to like family or friends who aren't involved in programming in any way, they think that it's some kind of magic. But to me, I'm like, well, that didn't even feel difficult. Like, I'm just tricking them. Like, they thought it was some kind of magic, but it was really just like a line of code. Yeah, especially, are you a student at Tech Academy?
No, PSU.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but yeah, having been at a code academy, actually just lost my train of thought there. Sorry. It's gone. Great. Anyone else?
Just want to make a comment about the job descriptions. I've been in IT staffing for 19 years. And there are often so many skills and technologies that companies will put on these job descriptions saying, hey, this is what we're looking for, these are the required skills. And usually when you boil it down, there's 3 to 5 technologies or skill sets that they're really looking for that are absolutely necessary. And beyond that, it's like everything else is a nice to have. So I would encourage everybody to apply if you have at least a few of those skill sets on your resume or some experience with them because it will unlock them.
Yeah, I can't agree with that more. I actually didn't even see the job description for my current job before I applied for it, so I wasn't able to disqualify myself from it. But yeah, don't disqualify yourself before you let them have a chance to tell you you're not qualified.
Okay, question. Say if you go to a website on LinkedIn and in the job description they say job requirements. I mean, are there certain keywords you should be looking for? Does that mean when they say job requirements, they're really looking for these, or is that just BS? I mean, how do you know what to look for?
Honestly, it really depends on the company. Different companies are better at writing job descriptions than others, for sure. And
different hiring managers have different expectations as well.
Okay.
yeah, Corlin could definitely speak up. Do you want to answer that question?
Oh, no, so they'll say like requirements, but like to his point, it's only like a couple of them. And also, we do a coding challenge at our work, which I think works out really well, because then it provides you with an opportunity to showcase your skills and show us if you're better on the front end or the back end. And then from there, we bring you in for an on-site and then do like some coding from there. But I'd say like always apply for the job, and if you're willing to do like the coding challenge, then that's always an opportunity.
So it really depends on the company. You can't take the description at face value.
Right, and you can't. But it also depends on the hiring managers. When I worked at Nike, if someone didn't have something specific in their resume, the hiring manager wouldn't look at them. So I would just add them in there, and then they would look at it and like hire. So it's all about knowing the hiring manager as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's okay to apply to that.
Mm-hmm. It's okay to apply, and a good like recruiter will be able to chat with you and suss out those skills.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing bad will happen to you if you apply for a job you're not qualified for, right? Like, you will just probably never hear from them again, or you'll get at worst a rejection email. But that's the worst that can happen. So always apply.
Working on my projects. So should I give an emphasis on the cover letter, like why I should be there,
Or
or
link to your GitHub.
curious, how many like applications or resumes did you do before you got your current job?
That's a good question.
Just like an estimate.
I think like serious applications, probably like almost 40.
40?
Yeah.
Or did you like take the first offer you got, or was there always something?
What's that?
Did you take like the first offer you got, or was it like?
So I had kind of a weird situation with another job offer that happened before, but the job I have now was my second offer. So,
It's only because she works at a fantastic place. It was worth taking that offer. If it would have been anyone else, she would have passed it until she found this one.
yeah, don't settle. That's actually pretty true though. Like, don't settle just because you think that you're not going to get anything else. Like,
Also, you didn't even apply. You just took the opportunity to get a copy.
yeah,
Yeah,
I wrote Corlin on
like-
LinkedIn.
How do you kind of more immediately mitigate that stress? Like, let's say you're going into an interview and you're just really struggling with imposter syndrome. What do you do in that moment?
That is a good question. I actually had a slide that I deleted from my presentation that I'm going to show you guys anyway, but this is what I do.
Yes.
Yeah, more or less, I just like pictures of cats also, so there's that. But yeah, just reminding myself that, first of all, the worst thing that can happen is I don't get the job, which definitely is not a great thing to happen. But every interview was a learning experience. I had several of them, but they were all positive experiences by the end. So as I got through more of them, that fear started to really go down, especially when I saw like how they were responding to me in the interview and how I was able to answer the questions. It boosted my confidence a lot. But yeah, definitely before my first one, I was really nervous. But remembering that they're all just people, I think, is the most important thing. Like what you said earlier. They want to find someone to work for them just as much as you want to find a job. So if you're a good fit, like it'll work out. You just have to be yourself, basically, which is kind of cliche, but very true.
I think enthusiasm towards just like the opportunity that you're applying for goes a really long way. Your attitude going into it goes a really long way, and definitely if there's something that you don't know, don't try and fool somebody. You know, just be very upfront with it. And I think people will appreciate that a lot more.
And sometimes a level of reassurance if you're not totally skilled at one particular thing or area, giving that reassurance that, hey, I'm really quick to learn, this is definitely a skill set I can plan to pick up, and giving the interviewer that confidence that you'd be able to fill in that job.
Yeah, for sure. Like, so in my job, I was hired to be a full stack developer with JavaScript on the front end and Java on the back end. I had never even touched Java, written a line of Java when I got my job, but I apparently convinced them that I would be able to learn it, and so that's the most important thing. Having examples that you can point to of how you, like proof that you're able to learn things, especially that you can learn them quickly or well, it's really helpful.
Something maybe a little more direct. Those are all great once you have the confidence to do those kind of things, but one thing that you can do, and this is good for anyone who wants to build up their confidence, is find something that you know you're going to fail at and do it. So apply for jobs that you know flat out you're not qualified for and go and do the interview. Get used to that idea of failing, and then it's not a big deal when you go into any other position. You're like, all right, well, if I fail, I guess I know what that feels like, and it's okay.
Yeah, that's super true. There's a guy who, I don't remember his name right now, so this is going to make this not as good of a story, but he made it a point to go out and fail every day, I think for a year or something like that. Maybe some of you have heard him, I think he was on Joe Rogan. But he was really afraid of failing, so he went out and purposely failed all the time, just maybe asking people for ridiculous things or anything you could think of. Yeah, failing a lot makes it a lot less scary when you do fail. So.
When you're going through an interview process and you apply for a job that maybe you do have 100% of the experience, but sometimes they say no because of some kind of personality fit. It's out of your control. A lot of times it's out of your control whether or not that's the perfect job and you're the perfect candidate. You could know everything and still not be the right fit for what they're looking for. So there are lots of opportunities out there. So now that you just bottom line, you're not in control of how they're going to receive you.
Yeah, that's true. It's not always a reflection on your abilities if you don't get a job. It could be a lot of other things. Anyone else? Anyone have like a really good imposter syndrome story they want to share? Where they like tricked someone into thinking they were good at something?
Get fired.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to share is, so after I graduated from college, it's like 2 years ago, I started applying, and I think I applied for like 6 months, still didn't get anything. This was in New York. Very, very hard. So I got to a point where I was just like applying like and I just started playing around with the interviews. Like I was just like, let me just say this and let's see what they say. So eventually, I got to this interview, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna be myself. If the interviewer asks a question that doesn't make sense, I'm just gonna let them know. So I'm just gonna go with that attitude, just like whatever. Like I'm not gonna try to look a specific way for that person. And I actually got that job.
Okay. That's
Like
awesome.
he told me, I forgot what the situation is, but yeah.
It's probably the best.
I think I corrected something that he said. I was like, no, I disagree. I actually think this is a better way to say that. And, you know, in my head, I was like, I'm crazy. I'm not going to get this job. But I did get it. I was like, wow, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's huge because I think a lot of times that fear of not knowing enough makes you feel, I felt this a lot, like I don't know as much as this person, so how can I tell them they're wrong or that I disagree with them? But everyone has a different perspective, different things that they can add, so that's super important. Anyone else? Yeah.
So you got your job through like somebody on LinkedIn?
I didn't know Corlin actually. I just saw her post and I wrote her a message. And
So I wrote a post saying, I said like, I know you know everyone's hiring software developers, but do you know how we Zoom? Let me buy you coffee and we can discuss it. And then I think that's the message that she responded.
yeah.
What do you think about like looking for jobs at like meetups? There's a lot of people come to meetups and like job opportunities.
That can definitely be a good way to do it. Yeah, meetups or LinkedIn, like don't be afraid of going up and talking to someone you don't know and trying to get to know them for looking for a job because, you know, you could be just what they're looking for. So even if you feel like maybe you're not good enough to fit that role, I would still try it anyway.
A lot of people are open networkers and will meet up with you, like, no matter what. Like, a lot of people are. You just have to ask.
Well, that's all. Thanks, guys, for listening. Come and talk.
Thank you guys for coming out. We do this Tech Talk every week at 1 on Fridays, and if there's any of you that are interested in doing a Tech Talk, feel free to come up and talk to me and get some worked out. Other than that, have a great rest of your day and an awesome weekend, and see you next time.
Yes.
Just recent graduate and we've got placements right now out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know. Pretty sure it's
A lot of the recruiters I've talked to so far mid-level senior ones, but I don't care.
Yeah.
See what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, just because
yeah, that's
but that's it.
just a little more. Yeah, you can apply. You can always apply.
Sounds great. You got a good name. I appreciate it. It's my dad's name.
Oh, is it?
Thank you for doing it. Appreciate it. It gives me some.
You don't even get me started. Oh, yeah, Thursday. I worked until 10:30 last night. I was at it.
Not really.
Oh, the guy who like refreshed
Starting early. I want to say start in Chicago area. How long did you
It's just 3 months, so
cool, it was a very good presentation. I really look what they would say different perspective. And you have your LinkedIn?
Oh, I got it.
I'm actually a student here. Yes, I've been here for 7 months. This is my 7th year. I'm about to finish the program finally. So the reason why I asked you is because I'm working I work for like then that's just me like, holding down a private still a big guy.
But I understand. Yeah.
What's the success rate?
No, no.
From all city.
The elevator needs to go
About how your financial success. My son is
I'm just curious on,
Yeah, we all.
understanding of how
It's not strong.
technology.
It's somebody.
I mean, I guess on the flip side, I would also,
Well, I think that, probably really a lot about the thing, a lot more than that infection.
not helpful.
Yeah.
uh,
New money. Already tonight.
Yeah.
Don't know. Oh.
well, I said, I feel it.
Good job.
Here, let's get a lot of stuff like lunch. I don't think